Students for Gaza, the pro-Palestinian branch of the San Francisco State Student Union, coordinated a student strike on October 8th, where students picketed and held a rally. The strikes came as a response to the CSU system's continued weapons investments. It was also a response to ongoing tuition hikes and class cuts, which will be the focus of this video. As it stands, tuition will increase by around $400 every year until 2029. In total, it will amount to just shy of $2,000. In the short documentary, I talk to students and faculty over the issues being raised. I then look into what caused the issues in the first place, and end by looking at what could be done about them.
Because when we fight, we win! When we fight, we win! When we fight, we win! Thank you.
I chose the school partly because it was like affordable. The reason why a lot of students go to SF State is for that reason. I'm a bit lucky because I'm going to be this my last year, so it's only going up 6% for me. But I've talked to students who, I remember I talked to one girl from my class who she literally said that she has a little sibling, and she's going to be out of school soon, but she has a little sibling that wants to go to San Francisco State. It's her dream school. She was talking about how her sister is like dead set on SF State. She was dead set on it because she thought that it's somewhere that she could actually afford to go to university as like a working class student. But now it's like to the point where she doesn't know if she will be able to. Genuinely, like, it's affecting people in terms of the next generation is not going to be able to get an education. But even for her, the same girl, I remember I was talking to her and she was saying that she works not one job, 2 jobs, and she commutes an hour and a half here and back from like Fremont. And she was like, yeah, I get like 5 hours of sleep every night. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like, that's insane. How is anyone going to do an education and do it right if they can't even be on campus for like more than a couple hours a day, or can't study for more than a couple hours a day, or can't sleep more than 5 hours a night? Like, that's just ridiculous.
I get so upset that like in this country we have to pay so much for schooling in general, higher education. It's unfair that kids have to be out here protesting. I also know that when I signed up for my classes, I had totally different professors and they got switched around the week before.
I had to change my schedule like 3 times over the summer. I set out my classes and then they said, hey, we're not doing this class anymore. Then they did it 2 other times. I was working over the summer, so I didn't even know that was going on until like I checked. Maybe I should like look at my school email. And then like it was just like all my classes were just, they're like, hey, you can't take this anymore because we're cutting it.
Personally, I don't think tuition hikes are going to go up any further. Give another 2 to 3 years, and I think they'll go back down. So it's all keeping that mentality that things are going to get better.
I think it takes a bit of a level of like a difficult understanding that things are not going to change unless we collectively force them to change. Like, me and you could go to Lynn Mahoney's office tomorrow and knock on her door as much as we want. She won't give a shit. The thing that she actually cares about is when her university, when her students actually are like organized enough where we can like act as a collective, because the university functionally, they just cannot function without the students. So if thousands of students are not going to class, she has to listen to us because her university will not exist without us. So I think students need to realize that the way things are going to change is in this way. It's never going to be just some other students figure it out for you. It's always going to have to be us figuring it out collectively. It's difficult, it sucks, but that's the way things work.
What are the current like justifications by Mahoney and the chancellor and why they're, increasing tuition and cutting budgets? Do you have any idea?
They say it's because they're at a deficit.
CSU officials are wrestling with the possibility of a $1 billion deficit for the upcoming school year. CSU officials say the budget gap is due to a lack of support for higher education and rising costs.
To understand how the CSU got in a deficit, you have to look at their source of money. 60% of CSU's money comes from California state funding. The rest comes from tuition and other student fees. California is planning to reduce CSU's funding by a little under 8%, which explains why CSU is raising tuition and making budget cuts. So if the system's financial problems are caused by the state reducing its funding, why is it reducing its funding in the first place? Well, that's because they're in a deficit of their own. To not go too in-depth, essentially, Newsom's administration overestimated how much money California would make. This led to the deficit. However, I do want to note that this was during COVID, so a lot of that extra spending went to providing aid to people in need. Whatever opinion you may have on the administration's budget decisions, the fact is, whether we like it or not, cuts are being made. So that brings me to how the CSU system is handling their issues right now.
The CSU is famous for mismanaging funds. Like, if they're not investing in Lockheed Martin and Palantir, why is that money not coming back into paying lecturers?
In 2024, Students for Gaza negotiated a deal where San Francisco State divested from weapons manufacturers. Like Professor Kava, I was also curious to know how the newly divested funds would be used. And by pure luck, San Francisco State President Lynn Mahoney was a guest speaker in one of my classes. This gave me the opportunity to ask her myself, and this is what she said.
Can I just jump to the question to go to teaching about how will the university use the money that they have divested from weapon manufacturers? So this is our endowment. This is money that has been raised through donors. And then with the money we make off that through those investments, last year it was $6 million we raised over the $163 million. That funds, mostly it funds student scholarships. And then it focuses some endowed professorships and some faculty and student research. So we're not redirecting monies. We're just going to invest the endowment in other things to generate revenues to support our students.
First of all, why is it being used to like kind of play the stock market? It's clear that this is becoming like a sense of like a money-making institution and not actually a place for quality education.
Yeah, I mean, and I would just say I think that that's symptomatic of a problem with, you know, like what they call higher education, like in general, which is that you're shifting from a model where you're kind of profiting as a corporation, but pretending you're a university. And so like, you know, this is fundamentally contradictory, antagonistic, and like completely, you know, nonsensical, because the things that you prioritize to raise funds are not the things that are actually anyway in line with what you're supposed to be doing as an institution. It's really about, you know, these shareholders making money, and it's so obscenely blatant.
It's all about just money more so than anything else, than like the actual people who are being affected by those types of decisions that are being made. A lot of people that I know, family, even myself, are like drowning. So like everyone's kind of like trying to like survive, and it's just not fair at all.
My name is James Martell. I'm a professor of political science at SF State. I've been here since 2002, so that's like 22 years. And I was the chapter president of the California Faculty Association, the local chapter at SF State, for 6 years, and I just stepped down last year.
Do faculty or students have like any direct vote in how to use money, or like whether or not to raise tuitions?
None, zero, like none. Nobody ever asks us anything.
Who are these people who are making these decisions?
It's the board of trustees. I mean, I think there's some kind of cabinet with you know, Mildred Garcia and Chancellor's office and stuff like that. They have tons of lawyers. They have a big team.
Are those the same people who are giving, you know, Mahoney and those people raises?
Yes, yes.
Like, how is it that you're getting a raise when lecture faculty being cut and like student tuition is being raised? Why should students have to pay more money for less?
Like, we could get better shit with like the amount of money that we're being charged here, but it's all just like going to a couple people at the top.
Like, I keep getting told, like, if we took away the money from Mahoney and like all the deans and the you know, all the AVPs that we have here, that still wouldn't fix our financial problem. And I know that, but those big bucks are for those people not to cause trouble to the CSU system.
All of this could be paralyzing at first, so I explored what has been done in the past to see how it could guide any future action.
We went on a one-day strike in December, and that was something that built a lot of power.
And yesterday, the picket lines were in San Francisco, on Monday at Cal Poly Pomona, and today they're here at Cal State LA.
We do not have proper parental leave. Our class sizes keep getting larger. We are working together to make sure that we can maintain the dignity of our profession.
There was a lot of momentum and support for the strikes. I mean, especially like I think among like the faculty, you know, at SF State, but broadly we had a big, you know, I think we had a lot of support across the CSU in general.
The one at SF State was magic. It was amazing. The students were there, the faculty were there. It was just wonderful. Then we had another strike in January that was supposed to be a week-long strike, and it was called off after the first day.
We were all prepared, you know, to go on this 1 week strike, 5 days. And then at the end of that day, about 9 p.m. is when I got the email that our statewide CFA board called off the strike. Then they proposed this tentative agreement that was honestly not much different from the contract that we were protesting against.
In terms of just the money, we were asking for a 12% raise, which would have brought us just to the level of inflation, so we would stop losing money. What we ended up with instead was effectively a 10% raise, but it was in two pieces. A 5% raise that we got right away, and then a 5% raise that was conditional. We actually did end up getting that, but it was, you know, it was not a sure thing. And they did one good thing, which is they did raise the floor for lecturer faculty of how much they got paid. So that was another good thing. So the contract wasn't terrible, but we felt we could have gotten a lot more.
And why do you think they, you know, closed it so quickly?
I just think, you know, this is very typical of a lot of unions that, you know, that they don't have a lot of faith in the rank and file. What they said was that a lot of the campuses, they were barely having their act together for this, you know, for the one-day strike, and they called it, you know, and they were given a very like a vanishing offer from the CSU system, so they had to act fast.
There was a lot of strife of like figuring out like, how do we have faith in our union if we get a 5-day strike called off after 1 day? So that was really jarring, actually.
Were faculty able to vote on like whether like to go on with that agreement? Or
no, we were not allowed to vote, and actually, we're putting forth a proposal in this assembly coming up that in the future, any calling off the strike will have to go through a faculty vote. For me, it was very important to push them even 1% past what they were willing to give, because that would have allowed them to acknowledge that that money was available, even though they said it wasn't. And the reason why it's so important is because as long as the CSU system says that they can't afford to pay more than the small amount of money that they had budgeted for this, and so they can create precarity and claim poverty and cut us all to the bone while they're just bloated with money. I mean, the people that have suffered the most are the lecturer faculty and the students. The lecturer faculty, we've lost like 350 of them, and it's going to get worse.
When they're closing these departments, how do you think that affects attendance?
I mean, I think it's like creates a death spiral, you know, if they're having less and less offerings, we're having trouble attracting students. Like, it makes it even harder. There's no classes, you know. In my department, political science, we had 12 lecturers, and now we have 2, and we might have 0. So that's like, we lost half our faculty, basically. That's like a huge deal. And all of this is happening while we're sitting on this mountain of money.
A common trend I noticed within my investigation has been people in power making decisions against the majority's interests. And in all of these cases, the people affected have had 0 say. So I asked people how they felt with Mahoney and the administration as a whole.
I'm not even sure what Mahoney, for example, does for me, does for my fellow classmates.
Do you think that level of administration is needed, or do you think faculty and students could handle that situation? Fuck no, it's not needed. Students and faculty do all the fucking shit work. We could run this university more effectively than they ever can. You need people who actually are involved in the education to run the educational institution. That I feel like that should be common sense.
What would you say to some people who bring up the fact that administration is kind of needed to run things?
I disagree. I think they're just parasites, basically, and all they do is rearrange furniture on the Titanic.
How do you think a system that's more democratic with students and faculty, how do you think that would work?
I think that would be amazing. I mean, I think, on this campus, for example, in the encampment, the students and the faculty organize together, and we have the only successful divestment in the United States. And that's because we're together, we're organized. So organization works. It's just very hard to do. You have to really get ahead of steam. You have to commit to it, and all that. But it works. They really couldn't do anything to us because we were so tight, and I think that's the only thing that's going to work in the future too.
I'm also happy to answer the question about my salary, which I know is a hot topic. I'm well aware that I am very well compensated, and that I have an obligation to make sure that my colleagues are well compensated as well, hence my support for our union activity last year. My salary is not what's driving up the cost of public education. And again, I don't want to dismiss that it's a very high salary. You can watch the Board of Trustees and they'll explain that my salary, as high as it is, still doesn't get to the median for my kind of position. So, but I think that's kind of a cop-out. I think the real answer I want to give you is that the reason that public education, the cost has gone up to tuition increases because our state is no longer funding us at the rate that they were. While I recognize my salary is high, the real focus should be on advocating to the state not to abandon its goal for higher education.
Mahoney isn't wrong when she says state funding cuts are responsible for the tuition hikes, but it feels a bit disingenuous when the CSU system reserve funds aren't mentioned. Through my investigation, I found that the CSU allegedly has money locked away that could solve the current deficit with billions still left over.
What do they got in reserve? Well, if we just focus on the green, the unrestricted, this is just a tremendous picture. By the end of 22, the CSU system had over $6.6 billion in unrestricted reserves, most of which associated with the university. $5.5 billion with the universities, about $1 billion with the auxiliaries. And that's tremendous growth, tremendous freedom and flexibility. These reserves have been built on your backs. I'm not just saying this because you want to hear it. These reserves have been built because they do not pay the employees what they should be paying them. It's that simple. And that's why these reserves are so large and growing. And you always ask with the reserves, to what end? Why are you doing this? Why are you creating this big savings account that you claim you could never touch and you're never going to use? It really is a question that needs answering.
These findings were in 2023 in the context of the faculty's previous mentioned strikes. Apart from revealing the amount of unrestricted money the CSU system has in the reserves, if the audit's information is true, it shows that the CSU system has a history of undercutting agreements that could have been comfortably met. This explains why Professor Martell hoped that the faculty union would negotiate for more than what CSU initially offered, to make the system admit that they could afford more than they claim. I reached out to Lynn Mahoney's office via email to see what they had to say about the reserve fund. I got a response from Robert King, Mahoney's office communications director. He says that in June 2023, They were told that the entire system had a total of $766 million in the reserves. That's a massive difference from the billions that the faculty union's audit found. This is where you have to decide who to believe. But reserves aren't the only collection of funds that the CSU system has. Through the help of one of my sources, I was able to find the CSU system's investment report, which they are required to release by law. In the report, it shows that as of March 2024, there is a total of $8 billion spread between 3 investment accounts. The investment disclosure is straight from the CSU Systems Committee of Finance, so that total isn't in any question. While I understand that it's prudent and responsible budgeting to always have money reserved in these accounts, it's hard to believe that a portion of the billions couldn't have been redirected to lessen the severity of the layoffs and cuts. And again, as all of this is happening, administrative staff like Mahoney are getting raises. Like we established, salary raises aren't fueling the budget problems, but what it is doing is creating a sense of division. How could any true sense of unity be built on a foundation of tremendous inequality? The chances of the CSU system successfully organizing together and advocating the state from the system are, in my opinion, very low. But is that what the administration truly wants? Or is pointing to state cuts just a convenient way to divert attention from the funds that the system currently has? To be honest, I don't know. All I do know, though, is that decisions are being made by the Board of Trustees that neither students or faculty agree with. And upon further research, Gavin Newsom, whose administration is the one gutting state funding, is the only person who could appoint or remove board members. To wrap things up, this is my opinion. I think the best shot faculty and students have in fighting against rising costs and devastating cuts is through gaining direct and equal voting power within the Board of Trustees. There is 1 alumni, 1 faculty, and 2 students in the board, but compared to the 16 members selected by the governor, they are outnumbered. With equal representation, the board would be able to make decisions that reflect the needs of students, faculty, and staff. It's much easier said than done, and I don't know how that process would exactly look like, but it doesn't sit right with me for decisions to be made by the Board of Trustees without the equal representation of those affected. If you have any thoughts, please write them down in the comments. I'm going to end the video with some closing words from Professor Zaza.
All of this money that people are being asked to pay, and yet, people are still not getting, an effective education. They're still being, basically having to work themselves to death with all of these jobs. And at the same time, our institutions, across the nation are still, complicit in genocide, right? SFSU is the first that has actually, voted to, to sort of set a standard and be, have an investment policy that, caters towards human rights, which is the bare minimum. But across the country, we're seeing that that's far from the norm, right? It's actually the norm to be invested in occupation, in genocide, and in settler colonialism. When we say things are not working nationally, and they're also not working internationally. It's really time to divest from death and reinvest in communities, reinvest in education, and reinvest in the people.